Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the our public workshop for today. 首先喺呢度再一次歡迎大家啦，嚟到我哋行為健康教研中心今日呢一個嘅公開講座嘅活動。咁介紹下我自己先，我係 Venus 啦，係呢個中心嘅教學顧問。我不如用中文先啦，我發覺中英跳嚟跳去有啲亂啦。咁先歡迎大家啦。咁今天呢，我不如都稍稍再提一次，因為我知道可能我哋在座有啲朋友係需要聽個翻譯機嘅。咁如果你有需要用翻譯機咧，可能而家趁我哋未開始，咁麻煩可以出去出邊，我哋有個 counter 可以幫到你手，咁會借用個翻譯機可以聽到個翻譯嘅。咁歡迎大家嚟到今日啦，我哋呢個都係屬於呢個何定邦先生佢哋家人贊助嘅呢個身心靈全人治療嘅其中一個工作坊系列。咁好時間好快啊，2年嘅。成個計劃咧，咁我哋已經完成咗1年嘅活動啦。咁頭先如果有啲朋友早啲嚟到咧，咁我都見到我哋喺上年嘅時候有一連串嘅活動都舉辦咗啦。咁亦都好開心，有好多朋友一齊嚟參與。咁亦都有一個嘅我哋嘅年尾嘅時候咧，辦咗一個嘅研討會。咁亦都係好多朋友一齊嚟到。咁再接再厲啦，嚟到13年，我哋今次係13年嘅第一個活動。咁繼續亦都好多謝我哋嘅活動嘅贊助人啦。咁阿何太啦，同埋佢哋家人為我哋嘅活動俾咗好大嘅支持俾我哋嘅。咁所以就希望每一位今日在座喺我哋呢一度當中咧，都可以從呢個活動裏面咧獲得到你哋嘅聽到一啲對你哋好寶貴嘅一啲資訊啦，翻到去可以同你哋嘅家人朋友，甚至乎喺工作崗位裏面咧，可以有一啲作用或者有啲分享可以帶翻去，好嘛？咁好啦，而家翻個英文台先。So welcome everybody for coming today for the public seminar. Just as you may know, actually we have this 2 years project at the Danny Ho lecture and workshop series in holistic therapy. We have finished the first year programs with a series of the workshop and the symposium in 2012. A lot of friends join us for all the programs, and we are very happy to see so many of you coming today again. So moving on to the next phase, in starting with the first program in 2013, we are still looking forward to your presence and also to bring your friends and families and colleagues to come and join us. Hopefully, all of you will get some of the benefits and all the good ideas and bring them back to your workplace, to your home, and to share all the benefits, quality that you can share in your life. Okay, so may I now first briefly introduce today's speaker, Dr. Lisa Hens. Dr. Hens is a clinical psychologist and also an art therapist. A very good combination, because sometimes we said, sometimes in psychology we are confined to some sort of talk therapy. But in art therapy, we are making use of the whole dimension to see a person holistically. And as far as I know, Lisa, her work is mainly working on managing the lifestyle, especially working with people who have difficulties in very basic things, exercise, eating, that sort of issues. But those are the very basic but very important parts of our life to make a balance, to maintain a better well-being. So I'm very looking forward to today's seminar, and hopefully all of you will also enjoy the talk. So OK， 咁咧就介紹一下先，好簡單地。咁係今天我哋嘅講座嘅嘉賓咧，咁係 Lisa 啦。咁佢本身係一位嘅臨床心理學家，亦都係一位藝術治療師。咁我哋覺得呢一兩個專業走埋一齊咧，係非常非常之咁好嘅一回事。因為喺我哋睇到一啲輔導或者專業嘅幫助人嘅工作裏面，有時心理學裏面咧某一個方向可能比較局限多少少係一個對談式，但係如果加埋上用到於一個藝術治療咧，就更加多方面咁樣一齊去做功夫啦。咁Lisa本身嘅工作咧，亦都好集中於做一啲為一啲要服務嘅對象，講緊就處理佢哋嘅飲食啦、運動啦。聽起嚟好似係一啲好簡單嘅元素，但係咧真真正正如果喺呢啲元素裏面能夠幫助到佢哋攞到一個好嘅平衡咧，為成個身體健康係好重要。咁我相信同我哋呢個行為健康教研中心常常推動嘅概念都好一樣啦。我哋講嘅一啲其實好東方概念嘅，即係養生啦，點樣從一個生活最基本層次入手，去幫助我哋身體更加健康嘅。咁唔阻大家時間啦，唔講太多啦。咁不如我哋請大家一齊去歡迎我哋今日嘅嘉賓。Lisa，thank you。
it's on. It's on? Good. Welcome, everybody. I'm very, very honored to be here. This is my first time in Hong Kong, and very honored to talk to so many interested people, so many people who are interested in wellness, body, mind, and spirit. So what you have in front of you is a packet that's very academic. And my talk is going to be, I hope, as Venus said, a talk that you can listen to. You'll certainly have the academic part to take home with you, but I hope you can listen with your whole heart and hear this information and take it home to your families, to your workplaces, so that you can live as we intend, very holistically, body, mind, and spirit. So the topic that I'm talking about today is called Enrich Your Life, Change Your Life, Achieve Optimal Health. So as Venus mentioned, I'm a clinical psychologist and also an art therapist. I'm an adjunct faculty member at St. Mary of the Woods College in Indiana. But my primary workplace is at the St. Helena Hospital Center for Health, very similar to the Behavioral Health Center here with the hospital across the street. And it, as Venus mentioned, it's a lifestyle medicine program. So people come there with different medical problems. And as the psychologist, I do the clinical assessment and I lecture and do art therapy to try to figure out in the assessment what are some of the intrapsychic, the emotional, the intellectual, the behavioral, the social problems that make people less well or sometimes even ill. So residents come with hypertension, hyperlipidemia, they come with diabetes, they come a lot of times with chronic pain. And so we look at what are some of the lifestyle factors, some of the things that they do, some of the things that they feel, think, the family dynamics, the workplace dynamics that make people ill or make them less well. Even though they come with various different medical complaints to this, it's a 10-day residential program. So they live on the campus of a behavioral health center. They eat a predominantly vegetarian diet. They exercise every day. They have lectures from physicians, psychologists, dietitians, and they learn to change their life. So even though they come with various physical conditions, one of the underlying factors that almost everybody mentions is fatigue. They're so tired. And I think it's been my experience in working with these people that one antidote to fatigue is living wholeheartedly, integrating the health, body, mind, and spirit. And so when I was invited to speak here, it's a perfect venue because this lecture series is about living holistically, integrating body, mind, and spirit, health in all those areas. So my definition of optimal health is having good physical health, engaging social relationships, stimulating work, and an active spiritual life. Many of us find that our bad habits get in the way of achieving and maintaining optimal health. So we'll talk about changing some of those habits. And when we talk about wholehearted living, that's one way to change some bad habits. And Confucius said, whatever you do, do it with your whole heart. And so many thousands of years ago, we have the answer. Wholehearted living. Achieving optimal health means reducing bad habits and increasing good ones. So a bad habit is defined as a behavior that's associated with immediate payoff. It feels good immediately. but with a long-term price, long-term harm after it's repeated. A good habit is associated with a short-term payoff and a long-term payoff. That's what we try to get people to realize. If they have good habits, then they have good feelings now and good feelings later. All habits, whether good or bad, are processed through the same reward center in the brain, associated with an anticipation of dopamine release, and then when the reward is achieved, then the release of dopamine at that time. Usually, efforts to change or quit bad habits fail if they focus on deprivation. Don't smoke. Don't eat that kind of food. Don't work too much. Don't. People feel deprived. Diets don't work for this reason. When people go on diets, they can lose weight, but they're always looking forward to the time when they're not deprived anymore, when they can start eating again. And so that's why when they start eating again, if they eat the same way they used to, they gain that weight back and some more. So diets don't work because they're focused on deprivation. And any type of behavior change that's focused on deprivation will not work. Willpower is not enough to change a life. But lifestyle change can be successful if it incorporates a resource-rich environment and focuses on increasing resources and satisfaction rather than on deprivation. So we're talking about really enriching our environment. That's what the focus of the talk is. The Expressive Therapies Continuum is one way to conceptualize and practically populate a resource-rich environment. So it's one thing to tell people, live more richly. Here's a way to actually know what that means. The more enriched and the more healthy options you have, the less likely someone is to hold on to old negative habits. So you'll see when we talk about the Expressive Therapies Continuum, which is a way that art therapists and other expressive therapists conceptualize how to use art in therapy, that it has applications for everybody in their lives. The balanced person is able to take in information, process information, and express information in 7 very distinct ways. The optimally healthy person seeks out experiences in all of these different ways. And that's what I mean by enriching your life, seeking out experiences in all these different ways. So here's the example of the Expressive Therapies Continuum. It is developmental, it's hierarchical, and it's bipolar. So you'll see this in that handout. It's developmental in that it starts with very basic processing, the kinesthetic sensory level. It moves up to the perceptual affective level. Beyond that is the very sophisticated cognitive and symbolic level, and the creative overarches all. So I'll talk about each one of these different levels. The kinesthetic sensory level is developmentally the most primitive way that we take in, process, and express information. It's how infants and toddlers take in information through motor action, sensory awareness, and sensory processing. Think of an infant or toddler. They put things in their mouths. They touch things. They don't learn cognitively. They learn through action, repeating action, and through sensation. This is the most basic way in which people can take in, process, and express information. It's also the way in which most of us, we lose touch with this way of processing information. We're out of touch with the information that we get from our body. We typically depend too much on our higher cortical processing, our higher brain function. Moving up this ladder, we come to the perceptual affective level. That has to do with our emotions and our ability to perceive limits and boundaries on the perceptual side. Form, limits, and boundaries. Moving up one more level, this is the higher cortical processing, the cognitive more on the left brain side, more linear thought, language-oriented, cause and effect thinking. On the right-hand side, more symbolic, artistic, emotional, spiritual. So maybe more associated with right brain functioning. The creative level overarches all of these, meaning it can incorporate function on every level, or it can, creative functioning can happen with one level, as we will see. Most people have one or two preferred ways that they've learned work best for them in taking in, processing, and expressing information. And habits, bad habits, can be maintained by overdependence on one way or two ways of taking in information, and blocking others, or not using others, or neglecting other ways. Change can occur more readily when we're open to new ways of processing information. And so we're talking today about mindfully inviting new and different experiences into your life. So I'll give you an example of how people can have an overdependence on one way of information processing. I was working with a young woman for several sessions, and she asked to have her fiancé come to a session. Okay, so he came to the session. He was very quiet, and he didn't say a lot during the session. He just listened to her explain about herself and her artwork, and explain the things that had happened during the previous week. Towards the end of the session, I asked him if he had any input, any comments to make, any questions. And he said, you know, I think my fiancée, I think she lies to me. We had 5 minutes left. Okay, so can you give an example of how she lies to you? So he gave an example of, she told me a story of being fired from a job the previous week. And she said, she explained the story and said that her manager called her or said some bad words to her. He said, when she told me that story, she said he called her those bad names. Not that he said bad words to her, but he called her those bad words. Okay. Does he have another example of how she lies to him? He said, yes. I have a boat, and I was going to take my fiancé on the boat for the first time. And I asked her if she could swim. And she said yes. She couldn't swim to save her life. If she'd fallen over, she would have drowned. Isn't that lying? And she said right away, I love swimming. I love the water. I love the ocean. I love the boat. I love it. And so you can see she was very emotional in her way of processing information. He was very cognitive and very rational. He wanted to know not if she loved water or if she loved swimming or the beach. He wanted to know if she could swim. Period. But she said, and what he heard was, yes, I can swim. When she said, I love swimming, she didn't say she could swim. She said, I love swimming. So she was very emotional. And going back to being fired, when she was very emotional about having just been fired from her job, she told the story with lots of animation and lots of emotion. And the way he heard it was, the manager called me all these bad names, when she was just very emotional, and who knows how she said it. So she was very typically processing information with the affective component. In fact, her mother once told her, You don't see the world. You feel the world. Very emotional. He was very cognitive, always wanting to know the facts. So this couple might have had very serious marital problems if they even got married, right? Because they're so different. However, having had this time to talk together, they began to appreciate this is not lying. This is a different way of processing information. It's a different way. I have a different way, you have a different way, we all have different ways. And if we open our minds to other ways, then we can appreciate each other and form a nice couple rather than blaming each other when we misunderstand one another. So all of us have typical ways that we take in, process, and express information. But if we are open to other ways, then we live a very enriched life. If we invite and seek out experiences with each of these different ways. And I mean intentionally enriching your life. And there's a difference between living a life that is mindfully and purposely enriched and one that is just chaotically stuffed full of activities. That's very different. Being busy all the time is not enriched. Intentional enrichment can lead to flow, and chaos cannot. And flow is an interesting state. It's an interesting mental state in which an individual is completely immersed in a task at hand, has mastery over that task, yet feels challenged by it. Very fine line. And that is intrinsically rewarding. If somebody is challenged by a task and does not feel mastery, then they're stressed. If they're not challenged and they can do the task with one hand or both hands tied behind their back, then they're bored. So what we want is a balance between mastery and challenge and mastery, where we feel this flow. When people are in flow, the sense of time that they feel disappears. They experience moments of peak joy. And this type of work, this type of living, increases well-being across time. It's a very wonderful state of being. So here's the Expressive Therapies Continuum again, and we'll talk about how to have experiences on each of these or with each of these components where you can intentionally enrich your life to be well, body, mind, and spirit. Each of these components has a healing function, as we'll talk about it, and emergent function. Something emerges from our investment in each of these components. It can be seen as a scaffolding that supports optimal health. It can be seen as a ladder that we climb as well, one level leading to the next. Increasing functioning with all components leads to optimal health. And remember, we said that some were very basic and others were very sophisticated. That doesn't mean that any is better than the other or any is worse. They're all necessary. We have to be in touch with our body. We have to be in touch with our emotions. We have to know how to use our mind to control all those things. They have to all work in harmony. So one is not better than any other. They're all equally important. So let's talk about in each of these areas. Remember that we're talking first about the kinesthetic sensory level. In increasing sensory stimulation, anything that we can do to engage our five senses more intentionally, more mindfully every day enriches our life. So, for example, there are mood-altering effects of aroma and a whole field of aromatherapy. Very simply, In the program where I work, we introduce people to the scent of lavender, which is a relaxing aroma. And we're surrounded by it where I live. So the healing and relaxing effects of lavender, just one example. But there are many, many examples. And also where I live, every season to me is associated with a different flower and the scent of a different flower. The first flower that blooms in February, I live in California where it's a very nice climate. In February, there's a flower called Daphne. A beautiful scent in early February. And then in March, there's orange blossoms. In April and May, there's jasmine. Every season has its scent and its aroma, and appreciating those aromas enriches my life, enriches everybody's life. So the intentional noticing and taking in of the aromas the pleasant aromas that surround you. In the tactile sense, enrichment involves being aware of the sensual aspects of the fabrics, the surfaces that surround you. What fabrics do you wear? Are they natural? Are they breathing? Are they soft? Are they soothing? The tactile sense also involves the healing effects of touch. Touch is associated with the release of oxytocin. I always say that wrong because there's a pain medication called OxyContin. And I'm sure they called it that because of its similarity to the natural pain-relieving neurotransmitter in the brain, oxytocin. There are many studies that show that when we are hugged or touched, when we hug and touch our pets, that this natural pain-relieving chemical is released in our brain. It induces a feeling of well-being. In the gustatory sense, this means intentionally inviting very pure, wonderful flavors into your life, reducing the amount of salt, sugar, and sauces so you can really taste the fresh whole foods that are so nourishing. Avoiding or reducing the amount of processed food. We eat so, in the West at least, we eat so much processed food that we don't know what real food tastes like, real fruits or whole vegetables or whole grains. But reducing the salt, sugar, and sauces, we can be reintroduced to how wonderful these flavors are. In the auditory sense, this means decreasing noxious noise. The white noise, the continuous noise that surrounds us. Appreciating the beautiful, relaxing feelings of silence. Boy, we don't have enough of that in our lives. And increasing the pleasant sounds that surround us. And finally, in the visual sense, enriching the environment with color and art and the visual pleasure of being in nature, flowers, greenery. There are all kinds of studies in eco-psychology now about the effects of being in nature. It's not just visual, but if you think about nature, it's every single one of these sensory experiences. Nature includes what we smell, what we see, what we hear, what we touch. And there have been interesting studies on a phenomenon called nature deficit disorder. Too many people not seeing the green, not having that relaxing, revitalizing experience of being in beautiful nature. So nature is all those things. It's things that you see and smell and touch and hear. This summer, an owl moved into our backyard, moved into the woods behind my house. And it's a beautiful, pure sound, an owl. Just that, enriching, just listening to the sound of an owl is a wonderful experience. So here's our appreciation of nature. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Never lose an opportunity of seeing anything that is beautiful, for beauty is God's handwriting, a wayside sacrament. Welcome it in every fair face, in every fair sky, in every fair flower, and thank God for it as a cup of blessing." That's nature. Movement and rhythm. Movement might be evoked by auditory stimulation, and enriching our lives means taking pleasure in our strength, agility, ability, our ability to move, the rhythm that surrounds us, motion, dance. Many of us are so out of touch with our bodies because we don't stop and pay attention to what we can do and how our body is capable and able and moves in rhythm. But it's one of those things that we can enrich our life by just intentionally inviting some more rhythm and movement into our life. That's the kinesthetic sense. There have been now, at this point in our history of psychology, hundreds of well-done published studies that document the antidepressant effects of regular physical exercise. If more people engaged in regular physical exercise, we probably would prescribe many less antidepressant medications. Also, there's very good evidence and increasing evidence that regular physical exercise decreases the age-related cognitive changes that occur across the board. If we engage in regular physical exercise, we can cut our risk for developing Alzheimer's disease by 50%. That's amazing. We used to think that our brains stopped growing, that neuro pathways stopped and were fixed at a very young age. But now we find that with regular physical exercise, new neuronal connections can grow into old age. That's remarkable. We should all be exercising regularly, every day. I love this quote by Joseph Campbell about rhythm. "The goal of life is to make your heartbeat match the beat of nature, to match your nature with nature." So understanding that there's a rhythm to the world, understanding what our rhythm is, that rhythm provides us with a routine for waking, for eating, for exercise, for sleeping, and our body depends on that routine. That being in that kind of routine reduces stress. That's why when we do something like I did, travel 14 hours around the world, we don't feel as well as we do in our own home because we're out of rhythm. So matching our rhythm with the rhythm of nature. Music is another wonderful way to be in touch with movement and rhythm. Very interesting studies in music and music therapy that show that music can activate the same reward centers in the brain. Remember, we were talking about the release of dopamine as food and sex. Music can do this. It's almost as if, and when people are listening to music that they know and love, that they are anticipating with a release of dopamine the next note, and then rewarded when they hear it. There was so much research when Adele won all those Grammy Awards last year. I think she won some more this year. But Adele won very many Grammys, and people were studying, how does she do that? And so it was almost as if we were anticipating a certain note or a certain rhythm, and she just changes it just a little bit. And that causes people to have goosebumps and to love listening to her music over and over. So a lot of research in music therapy about the healing effects, the rewarding effects of listening to music. A wonderful way to enrich our lives. Find the music that we like, surround ourselves with the music that is pleasing to us. And music can be very there's certainly very different kinds of music. Music, active music to help you exercise, very calming music to help meditation, and music for different moods. I encourage people in the program where I work to find a music, a song or two or many songs that are theme songs. In that way, the rhythm is stimulating. The rhythm and the music can stimulate emotion, right? So we're moving up the hierarchy. Also, if we find meaning in the words, then it can be a holistic experience. That's how a song can be a theme song. It is rhythmic, emotional, and meaningful. I'll just give you a short case example of focusing on the kinesthetic sensory level. This was a patient, and I have to say that I am so grateful to the various people that have allowed me to use their artwork in presentations, in educational presentations like this. Without them, it would be a very different sort of presentation without any real life examples. And so I always try to honor the people that have allowed me to share their work. They did this with their consent and knowing that their identity would not be disclosed. But you know, when I say that to some people, they say, use my name, tell people who I am. I don't care. This is so important. You have to tell people who I am. So sometimes they want you to know. So this was a 45-year-old portrait artist, a woman suffering from what she said was artist's block. She felt that her work was not good enough, and this was after having a successful career as a portrait artist. She had some recent trauma and couldn't paint anymore. Some of the old voices that she heard in her childhood of not being good enough, not being beautiful enough, were coming back to her after a recent trauma. She was divorced, and in the divorce, her husband was very angry with her, and he went to her studio and destroyed almost all of her paintings, all of her inventory. It was a very, very big trauma. And then she decided she didn't want to paint anymore. Or she didn't decide that. She wanted to paint, but something inside said she wasn't going to paint anymore. She also didn't want to talk very much. So she was instructed, one of my instructions after attempting a few other things was to make some very ugly art because she was so concerned about how beautiful it is. Well, let's make something ugly. And so she had black finger paint and just the instruction of not creating any necessary picture with it, but just playing with it. Just using the kinesthetic sensory mode to feel it, to move, to sense what it was like. And I'll just take you through a series of her paintings. These all happened in one 50-minute session. There's one. You can see her very strong fingerprints. Kind of a mess and a handprint. Very strong. You can see that from this moving and shaping and feeling that a form is beginning to emerge. Even a little more definition. And it looks like an eye. Like a very critical eye. More form. That's a mouth with a tongue sticking out. And it looks like we're moving up even further because there are words here, so it's getting a little more cognitive. So you can see that the rhythm, motion, sensation, from that emerged some form. And then the words emerged and she was able to cry out her pain. No, no, no. And then she was able to talk about judgment and trauma from being loosened up. And we can allow emotion to be loosened in ourselves with a focus on movement and sensation. Now we'll move up to the perceptual affective level. And it's important for us to be aware of the design elements that surround us, how they either enrich or detract from the quality of our lives. And there's a term here in blue, isomorphism. It's a principle by which people take on the feeling of their surroundings. So what does your environment evoke in you? If it's chaotic and messy, then we will feel inside chaotic and messy. If our environment is neat and clean and calm, then we will feel calm inside because we take on the feeling of our surroundings. Other ways that form can help us, or a focus on form can help us, I'll go through each of these. Representational diversity. Lines can contain emotions and reduce stress, and lines can aid meditation. Here's an example of representational diversity. Being able to see things from another person's point of view. Is it a duck or a rabbit? Some people see one, some people see another. And when we're in relationship, if we're able to see things from another person's point of view, this is a very concrete example, but a very good example. If we can see things, intentionally see things from another person's point of view, then we increase the success of our relationships. And art is a wonderful way to do that. Lines can contain emotion and reduce stress. There are several well-conducted studies published in the art therapy literature that show that coloring in this form, in the form of a circle, can contain emotion, can reduce anxiety. And so we don't need to be afraid of limits and boundaries. That's what a focus on form does. It helps us honor limits and boundaries. And just as children need limits, they need to know, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do that? We say, no, that's the limit. That helps children feel calm and anxious. The same is true for a circle, for the lines, for limits, for boundaries. It helps reduce our anxiety. This is a beautiful example just with colored pencils. Lines can aid meditation. This is a process called Zentangle, and it starts with a random scribble, and within the scribble, just coloring different or creating different patterns. You see some cross-hatching of different types and sizes, some just lines, some other little forms. Usually there is no recognizable form in a Zentangle. It's just lines. And in creating the lines, we get into a meditative state. So usually there's no recognizable form. My son who's 17, made this one, and so he had to put his hand there and some other things, but I liked it. So that's a process called Zentangle, and that you can look up on the web and find directions. It's really very soothing, very meditative. On the affective side of this continuum, we have to understand why emotions are valuable. Why do we have emotions? And this is some very basic information that many of us did not get when we were children. No one told us emotions are signals to you. They are evolutionarily embedded signals that give you information about your environment. The classic example that I'm sure you're familiar with is fear. Fear is an emotion. It's a signal to you that there's a threat in your environment. And so in response to that signal, you fight or flee. Every primary emotion is the same way. It's a signal to us. Most people feel emotion and they say, "Oh, I don't want to feel that." So they do things. They do things not to feel. And I'm saying, in order to live well, holistically, healthily, optimally, body, mind, and spirit, it's important to invite emotion into your life. And know that maybe nowadays it doesn't ensure our survival, our physical survival, as much as it ensures the survival of our relationships. When we feel an emotion, it signals us, talk to somebody about what it is that you're feeling, usually. And certainly they also ensure our physical survival too. But predominantly they ensure the survival of our relationships. So it's important to embrace emotion, not avoid it or suppress it. And making and viewing art can be a gentle way to invite emotion into your life, to explore what emotion is, identify it, share it, express it, soothe it. And making or viewing art together as a couple or a family is a way to express and share emotion. Very gentle way to do that. So I just have a few examples that I use with people. Oh, first I wanted to say that shared experiences are what draw people together, but shared emotions are what deepen those relationships. So very important to invite emotion into your life, to have deep and satisfying relationships. An example from Picasso. So in visiting a museum, sharing with one another, not what does the painting look like, but what does the painting feel like? Interesting that in viewing this painting, some people see hope. Some people see an oncoming train. Very different emotion. So necessary to talk about what you feel. Similar color palette, very different feeling for me. So sharing and viewing art. Creating art can be a way for someone to communicate what they're feeling when they don't have the words. You can probably tell this was an adolescent that was somewhat angry. Using the crayon and banging with the crayon, coloring hard. So now we're moving up to the cognitive symbolic level, and the Expressive Therapies Continuum reminds us that cognition is just one way. The left side thinking is just one way that we take in, process, and express information. It's certainly very important. It's important to be able to plan. It's important for cause and effect thinking, for mental rehearsal. All of that is very important, but it's just one way that we take in information. Many of us depend too much on our brains and those cognitive abilities. But this is only one of six components. In considering this component and changing our lifestyles, we can think about our negative beliefs. And our negative beliefs we can look at like old laws that are still on the books that we haven't changed. Maybe they're there from 100 years. It's illegal to spit on the street, or you can't bathe two babies in the same bathtub. At some time, those laws had a reason. They were important. But we didn't change every single law. They're still on the books. The same with some of the negative beliefs we have from our childhood. Maybe they're no longer applicable, but we just haven't changed them. Now we can intentionally examine some of those beliefs. Are they helpful? If not, we can have some therapy, we can have some relationships that help us change those beliefs, sometimes called cognitive distortions. On the symbolic side, symbolic thinking can include spirituality, reading or writing poetry, an interest in mythology, creating art, tending to dreams, and inviting ritual into your life. Very, very enriching component, the symbolic component. So symbolic thinking can give rise to metaphor and rituals. As I said, family rituals bond us together with the people in our family. Social rituals bond us together as a society when we share common rituals, handshakes or kisses or however we greet, and the music we listen to, the sports that are important to us. All these things bond us together as a culture. And if we intentionally enrich our lives with these, it's very different than living chaotically and just being surrounded by them when they are not so meaningful. Religious rituals help us express a reverence for a deity or idealized state, our feasts and our festivals. Again, when we intentionally invite these into our lives, it's a wonderful way to enrich our life rather than a way that we feel overburdened because we have to prepare another meal or, oh no, now the in-laws are coming over again, or that sort of thing. So our family rituals bond us together with common memories and values, activities, songs, traditions. Tending to dreams is a symbolic activity that anyone can do. You don't have to analyze your dreams. You just have to pay attention to them. And our dreaming is one way that we process information, something that might be left over from the day, not really 100% conscious. Our dream life helps us process that information and gives us that information in very interesting forms. So we don't have to interpret our dreams, we just have to pay attention to them, and they will give us information. When I first was paying attention to my dreams, I was taking a psychology class in high school. And I had an interesting dream. I still remember the visual picture in my mind today. And I went to my psychology teacher and I said, "Can you help me figure this dream out? It was so powerful." There was an anthill in my yard. And not ants, but bees, honeybees, were coming out of the anthill. And they were stinging me, but it didn't hurt. And all she had to say was, she repeated about 3 times, "The bees don't hurt. The bees don't hurt you." And I don't know if you have the same kind of grading system here in this country where you get an A, a B, a C, or a D, but I was getting my first B, and it didn't hurt. And I'll never remember that dream. I'll tell you a very recent dream in preparing to come here. I was at a beach and I was watching some surfers, and they were surfing and they were having a wonderful time on the waves. And then the waves seemed to be getting a little big, and so I turned around and I went inside a building. It happened to be an auditorium. And from the auditorium I could still see the surfers. And one of them surfed a wave all the way into the auditorium, and he landed right in front of a podium that looked just like that. And I thought to myself, washed up in an auditorium. Washed up in an auditorium. That washed up is a term that means you're not really doing very well. So my dream was telling me I'm a little bit afraid of being washed up in an auditorium, probably in anticipation of coming here, my fear of being washed up in an auditorium. So our dreams give us very important information about ourselves and things we need to pay attention to. The creative function can involve, as I said, all sorts of information outlets and provide a more holistic experience for life enrichment. It offers integration. As I said before, music is a terrific example, the example of the theme song. Art is a wonderful example, and we'll have a little experience with that. It allows for the expression of mystery and transcendence, something that's greater than ourselves. We all want to know it doesn't stop here. Creativity invites flow, focus, determination, that intrinsic reward that we want to feel. And so let's have a short experience with this, or maybe not so short. You all have a blank piece of paper and at least one marker. And if there are extra markers, let's bring them in, give everybody more than one marker. But the first thing I want you to do, I might not be able to say this with the microphone. So I'm going to have you, without hitting your neighbor beside you, if you could stand up and stretch, because you've been sitting down for quite a long time. So stand up and stretch. Stretch your arms high and wide. Maybe make some movements if you can. I know it's a small room, but movements like, so if you could move your hands like this. This you can do without hurting anybody next to you. And maybe like this. Like a little scribbling motion, or like this. So lift this again. That feels good. A little like this. Okay. All right, now you can sit down again. A little bit loosened up. We felt it going. And use your marker. Use your marker to create on your paper some sort of scribble, that a mark that imitates the motion that you just made. So something. So any kind of motion that imitates what you just made. So just a scribble. That's not a very good example because you can't see it. Not too many lines, so now it's time to stop. Hopefully you have a color you can see. Now, that was a little kinesthetic. If our paper was larger, if the marker was a little more resistant, it would have been maybe more kinesthetic, but that was a little bit kinesthetic. Now, take your paper and look at it from various angles and find a form in there. Find a shape. Find an image. You can turn it around to another side. Turn it around. Turn it until you see some form that suggests itself. And then maybe you can change your marker with the person next to you or somebody around you for another color, and develop that form that you see into an image. So I'll take a red marker. I'm at a disadvantage because I can't turn it. But so take another color and develop that into an image. By reinforcing the lines, by adding some lines, by coloring. So I see this might look like a car. So I'll add the window. No, I don't. Maybe it looks like an animal. Anyway, it was a car. So develop yours into some image. So then you might think, why this image? Does this image mean anything to me in my life right now? Why did this image appear to me? How is this meaningful in my life right now? In my life right now, I'm in a taxi, wondering, am I going to get there on time? I'm not the one driving. That's not a good feeling. Somebody else is in control. There's so much traffic. This is stressful. Am I going to be there on time? I was here on time. But maybe that's why a car came into my life right now, and not a dog or a cat or something else. So we started with, this is just very simple and very basic, but it shows you how the creative process can work even in a simple scribble, even in a simple tangle of lines. We used a little bit of kinesthetic movement to loosen us up, to make the scribble. Then if we find a form, we're moving up. Then if we attribute meaning to the form, we're moving up. We're doing all of this to have a creative experience. And we think, aha, this feels good. I understand why this image came into my life right now. It enriches my life to know that. I'll show you the example from a case that goes through a similar progression. This is a young female attorney, 29 years old, single female. She's a self-described workaholic. She was a child of an alcoholic mother, but she did not drink herself. She worked and worked and worked. She was attracted to the use of art because it was so different from what she normally did. And she attended a public workshop that I did, and then continued later on in a private art therapy group. So she said, art therapy, that's interesting. I never do anything except work. Let me go figure out what art is and art therapy. So her first works were kinesthetic explorations. She was just moving the paint around and around and around, really not wanting to commit to any form at first. She just wanted, it was almost as if she couldn't do it well, she didn't want to do it. She didn't want to create a form because she wasn't a practiced artist. So her first works were just kinesthetic, maybe kinesthetic sensory explorations. This is a little bit of an example. You see how she took the paint and around and around and around, and then she pulled some yellow out from the center. Even the marks around the form indicate motion. But she wouldn't say this was anything. This was just an ambiguous form. But sometimes those ambiguous forms, they're not representational. From those ambiguous forms, we can begin to form something that's a personal symbol. So she had many paintings like this. And then she created one that was a little more formed, and she was invited to give it a title. And she called it Eye of the Storm. And someone in the group said, didn't you mean eye? You know, when you say that, when you use that term, they're really meaning eye of the storm. It should be E-Y-E. And she said, oh yes, you're right. You're right. I made a mistake. But then later on she said, no, I didn't. I didn't make a mistake. This is Eye of the Storm. The storm was my alcoholic mother and my feeling responsible for her, and then having to work so hard to prove that I was good, that we were good. It's really Eye of the Storm. She took this and then created a So we see how she moved from the kinesthetic to the perceptual. When she saw that it was a storm, she called it, she named it. We entered the cognitive symbolic level when it became a personal symbol for her. And she took it and created this more or less three-dimensional representation of it. This was a very personal symbol. And she said, you know, I didn't want it to be flat and stuck to that paper. I really wanted it to be able to move. And this was the beginning of her movement away from her identification with that family and that way of being the eye of the storm, the person who only worked to prove that she was good. And what we see in clinical practice is that when we change a medium, when we change, and as she changed, she herself changed from paint to this paper sculpture, that's when a real shift in her feeling about herself, in her feeling about the future, when that shifted. And we often see the same thing. When we shift medium or we shift levels, we shift inside. So as she found, creativity sometimes is about problem finding. Not just problem solving, but problem finding. At first she didn't know what the problem was. She was moving, creating, moving, and defining the whole time. Problem finding also means brainstorming before you implement a solution, incubating, letting it sit for a while before you implement, and then implementing something. As she created that paper sculpture and said, this is what I want my life to be. All of this without evaluation, but with openness and creativity. And everyone is creative in some way. Many people say, oh, I'm not artistic, I'm not creative. But everybody's creative in some way. The way we dress ourselves, the way we arrange our home, the way we do our work, the way we do our hair, the way we cook our food. There's so many ways to be creative, and all of us are creative every day. And intentionally enriching your life means mindfully being aware that you are creative, that you do these wonderful creative things every day with whatever component. And again, as I said before, one antidote for fatigue is wholehearted living. And creativity can help us determine the passion that provides purpose and meaning in our life and helps us avoid burnout. Sometimes when we're so fatigued, it's because we're doing a job that we're really not meant to do, or we're focusing our energy in one realm rather than in all realms, body, mind, and spirit. So I want to show you this video, if I can, that kind of sums it up. And I hope we'll be able to hear it well.
What makes you itch? What sort of a situation would you like? Let's suppose, I do this often in vocational guidance of students. They come to me and say, well, we're getting out of college and we haven't the faintest idea what we want to do. So I always ask the question, what would you like to do if money were no object? How would you really enjoy spending your life? Well, it's so amazing. As a result of our kind of educational system, crowds of students say, well, We'd like to be painters, we'd like to be poets, we'd like to be writers, but as everybody knows, you can't earn any money that way. Or another person says, well, I'd like to live an out-of-doors life and ride horses. I say, do you want to teach in a riding school? Let's go through with it. What do you want to do? When we finally got down to something which the individual says he really wants to do, I will say to him, you do that. And forget the money. Because if you say that getting the money is the most important thing, you will spend your life completely wasting your time. You'll be doing things you don't like doing in order to go on living, that is, to go on doing things you don't like doing, which is stupid. Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way. And after all, if you do really like what you're doing, it doesn't matter what it is, you can eventually turn it, you could eventually become a master of it. It's the only way to become a master of something, to be really with it. And then you'll be able to get a good fee for whatever it is. So don't worry too much. Somebody's interested in everything. And anything you can be interested in, you'll find others will. But it's absolutely stupid to spend your time doing things you don't like in order to go on spending things you don't like and doing things you don't like, and to teach your children to follow in the same track. See, what we're doing is we're bringing up children, educating to live the same sort of lives we're living, in order that they may justify themselves and find satisfaction in life by bringing up their children, to bring up their children to do the same thing, so it's all wretch and no vomit. It never gets there. And so, therefore, it's so important to consider this question: what do I desire?
So what would you do if money were no object? So lifestyle change can be successful in a resource-rich environment where you're doing what you love to do, where you invite experiences with all components, where your focus is on satisfaction and creativity, not on the denial of your heart's desire and deprivation. So I hope that you're open to input through all channels, and that you move daily, appreciate sensuality, invite emotion into your life, appreciate the natural beauty that surrounds you, express emotions, create rituals, live mindfully, especially create. And here are some references from each of the components: the sensory, the emotional, the creative, body, mind, and spirit, including a kaleidoscope coloring book for adults. Wonderful resource. My son told me I had to add that one. And we have plenty of time for questions, and I hope I have answers. Comments? Doesn't have to be a question, can be a comment. Yes.
Thank you. I would like to ask if you could share with us more successful case of using spirituality combined with art therapy. What would it be because we are in a context in Hong Kong, a culture of East meets West. So our spirituality here for our client or for the citizens here, they are influenced by concept of value system from the Chinese culture and also from the Western culture. For example, the more a major religion will be Buddhism for local Chinese, and also Catholic or Christian religion here.
Yes. So what would be a successful way to employ art therapy and spirituality? One of the most important things, I think, for people to know, regardless of their spiritual tradition, is that they are not alone. And if they have a strong spiritual foundation, then it is that strong upholding foundation, as well as a umbrella, a protective umbrella. So helping people embrace and depict, not in words, but in images from their heart, how they are supported, what supports them, and also what protects them. And so many times in art therapy, that circular drawing that we demonstrated, the mandala drawing, is a wonderful way to incorporate spirituality into art therapy, because it shows that there's no beginning and there's no end, that it is a foundation and an umbrella, that our spirituality is something that completely surrounds and protects us, that we're not alone, and also that we're not, and I think that most people get so much benefit from their spirituality by knowing that they are not, they're not the be-all and end-all. There's something greater. And so art therapy also, in whatever form it takes, allows us to experience that which is transcendental. So it doesn't stop with me. There's something greater than me. So I have people create mandalas for that. I also have them I often have people create something that reflects part of them that's a helpful spiritual guide, and on the alternative side, something that is an obstacle or a spiritual obstacle. Because if we acknowledge that which is our doubt, then we can overcome it. Many times people who are very strongly religious feel that there's no room for doubt. And so if they feel doubt, they feel very afraid. But if we are spiritual, then we realize that we're always wrestling with doubt. And sometimes we are very faithful, sometimes we're having crises of faith. So if we can represent both, and they're both integrated, then we're calmer, we're more satisfied. So helping people through art depict both the positive and the negative, the faith and the doubt, is another way to use art to sometimes say things that people can't say in words. They can't express their doubt sometimes. Other comments or questions? I wonder if, is there...
Can you tell me what kind of patients can be most benefit from art therapy and what the least?
That's a good question, and I'll probably give you a very bad answer, but any kind of patient. So art therapy works very well with children because art is the natural language of children. Children love to draw, and before they can express themselves well in words, they draw. And they express themselves sometimes in repeated drawings as they work through trauma, drawing and drawing and drawing. Art therapy works really well with adolescents who can imbue their drawing with satire and humor, and they can say things and maybe be somewhat rebellious in drawing, things that they couldn't do in real life. It also helps them, or painting, it also helps them express emotions and explore identity issues. If I can take it on and depict it, is that me? Is that me? Maybe this is me, because adolescence is a time of questioning and incorporating parts of identity. Art therapy also works well with adults. Many times when people hear that I'm an art therapist, they say, oh, you must work with children. They assume that I only work with children. But if adults can get over their fear that they have to be artists, then they can be very successful users of art therapy. If they understand, and we can teach them, that we typically process information with the left side of our brain, that using art materials and art media is a way to use the right side of the brain. And so it can help us discover things or have experiences that we wouldn't normally have as we get information from our right brain that's more emotional, spiritual, holistic, and different. They have to be willing to experiment. Art therapy can be used in schools to help children that are having school difficulties. It can be used in prisons to help prisoners adjust to life inside the prison, as well as begin to adjust to life and transitioning outside of prisons. Very successfully used. It can be used in private outpatient therapy, in hospitals like where I'm employed. It can be used in psychiatric centers with very disturbed patients, to help patients that are very disturbed maybe see things instead of their very particular way, to see things more representationally, more realistically. Talking about somebody who has problems with reality testing, psychoses, that sort of thing. Where can art therapy not be used? It can be used so many different places. In substance abuse treatment centers, there are art therapy programs. If the substance abuse treatment center is a 12-step program, there are ways to use art to work through each of the 12 steps. Just the first step, I have to admit that my life is unmanageable. Well, give an adult that hasn't created art in years some art materials. That feels unmanageable. That process mimics the first step. Wonderful way to work it through. So I could go on and on and on. So art therapy really can benefit so many people in so many different situations. Please.
Dr. Lysis, I want to ask the question that, can you give me some tips or some techniques for us to use this technique when dealing with the aged people, because they are undereducated, or they always keep their emotion inwardly?
Yes.
Yeah.
With the geriatric population, I would say not that different than any other population. So you're right, they do tend to keep their emotions inside. This is a population that was raised, maybe before the war, and so they've been very used to keeping things inside. So I would say start very slowly, and maybe use a kind of media that's very controllable, like the marker. Very familiar, very easy to control. Sometimes starting with a person's name and having them create their name and then elaborate on their name in color, in form, creating a picture from their name. What does it mean? Where did it come from? So that's some talking and some artistic creation. That might be a bridge from what they're used to into the realm of what they're not so used to. So creating something with their name. Then you might try with the elderly things that are very sensually stimulating. So smells, music from the era when they were young, that will stimulate emotion without, and painting to that music is very, very stimulating. So there's music associated with every era, and so if we use music that comes from their young adulthood, their teenage years, and they're painting to that music, that will be a way to open up some emotion. Other stimulating materials like things, spices or beautiful paint that will stimulate the emotions without being emotional, if that makes sense. So, Yes, please.
Do you have any idea about how to do some assessment and make some treatment plan, or after the treatment, after this therapy, how to do some evaluation about the result, whether it is effective or not?
Yes, thank you. So, using the structure of the ETC, I would in the assessment phase give people a free choice of art materials. And I would see what do they gravitate towards? Do they gravitate towards things that are kinesthetic, things that emphasize cognition, things that emphasize emotion or sensation? And over 1, 2, 3 sessions, at least 3 sessions, I would see what their preference is, because 3 sessions 3 times makes a trend. And so you can see, is there a trend toward things that are more emotional? Like the woman I talked about, the first, that loved swimming. So her attraction was to paint, and lots of vivid paint over and over and over. I could tell she was very emotional. And so in her treatment then, the Expressive Therapies Continuum then provides a treatment plan, because if she's overemphasizing emotion and underemphasizing cognition, then we want to move her in that direction by providing complex tasks that help her think through processes, that emphasize her ability to slow down, get the facts, and think through. We can plan a treatment that emphasizes the cognitive component. Then after our treatment is completed, again, we can do the same sort of thing. We can give a series of free art sessions. What does she choose now? Is she still mostly gravitating towards the paint without much form in her paintings, just a splash of color and emotion? Or is she more on the cognitive side and able to create something that has form and structure and some complexity? Does that answer your question? Sort of? Okay. Yes, please.
I have 2 questions to ask. Can you talk about a bit more about the role and task of the therapist in the therapeutic process? Yeah. Will you help the client to interpret what they draw? Will there be any counseling elements in the process? And is it a kind of natural healing? Because you allow the patient or the client to draw and then have sense what or to feel what they draw. And the second question is how to help the client or patient to realize the pathway of optimal health if he or she is immersed himself or herself in irrational emotion or thinkings.
Okay, so the second question is a little easier. So if somebody is immersed in the irrational, emotional side of being, then the very natural, again, the Expressive Therapies Continuum provides a framework for the treatment. So if there is a relationship between the 2 components, this is getting a little more technical, that is bipolar. So if we want them to be less emotional, and the bipolar relationship is in the form of an inverted U. So at first, the functioning on one component increases that on the opposite side. It gets to a very critical level where both are important, and then it can block functioning on the other side. So if somebody is very affectively involved, if we move them in this direction, if we help them get in touch with limits and boundaries and form, then we're containing emotion. As we said before, lines and being in touch with limits and boundaries and limits and boundaries and form can reduce the functioning on the affective side. So we help them contain their emotion through the use of art, formal elements. The first question was the importance of the therapeutic relationship. Yes, there are counseling elements. People that are trained as art therapists are trained both in art and art therapy and also counseling and psychological methods. So there is the relationship is extremely important, and as well as knowledge of our own preferences for art, artistic styles, art media. So we want to be able to offer our patients a full range of experiences in which we're competent and hopefully objective. If we don't know that and we only prefer certain types of artistic products or processes, then we'll limit what our patients are exposed to. So we have to really be knowledgeable in a large range of media and processes. And that's one way in which the relationship is important. The patient is always the expert on his or her artwork. Always the expert. So why did we go to so much school? No. So we do know some things. We know some things about color. We know some things about lines. We know some things about forms and symbols and all those things. We know it, and then we try to forget it when we're with somebody that's creating because they're the expert on what they've created. But in the back of our mind, we know some things, and we will invite questions and comments in a certain area that hopefully will raise their awareness of what we might see that they don't see. But we have to be aware that what we see that they don't see could be our own projection onto their painting. So that's what we are trained, and much of the clinical training and supervision is about this very topic. How do you not project what is your own feelings, emotions, imagery, and symbol onto something that somebody created? They have to be the expert on that. And luckily, we don't usually have just one session with somebody. We have several sessions. So over time, more and more will be revealed. And we have to be open, and it goes back to your question about the assessment and the treatment. We have to be open that things can change and evolve, and more will be revealed in time. So it's really a continual assessment, the whole therapeutic process. And the art gives us such a window every time we meet someone and they create. It's a wonderful window. Mm-hmm. Please.
Hello, Dr. Lisa. I have a question. Painting or drawing is time-consuming. How long is one section for an individual case?
Yes, painting and drawing are consuming. But I typically do this in a 50-minute hour. And when people know that that's the constraint, then they create within those constraints. And so they don't take the whole 50 minutes to create. They use 10 minutes, 12 minutes, and then sometimes I have them create things as homework. Most of the time I have people do something for homework and bring it in, or elaborate, or make a response piece or something like that. But you're right, it is very time consuming. And there are certain people who you learn have to do it all for homework because they're so detail oriented, and it will take the whole session to do it. But for most people, it takes 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and back and forth. Mm-hmm. So there could be time for two images in a session, and talking and back and forth. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Can I put it this way, that what you are doing is to facilitate the people, they are going to have an inner dialogue with themselves, then they can find their own way out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that's a very, very good way to put it. If we can facilitate this inner dialogue, some people are not aware that they have it, but when they put it on paper, it becomes very apparent that there's an inner dialogue. And so we guide them for the way out, because sometimes people want to stay, they don't want to, but they're so familiar with where they are and where they are stuck, then we can slowly guide them out. But I agree with you. I very much respect the individual and that dialogue, and I know that inside everyone is a desire to heal and be whole, and we're just guiding them along that way, helping them realize that dialogue. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any other comments or questions? I hope you take this idea of living an enriched life back home. Mm-hmm.
But clinically, many clients, they have some intention to keep secret for themselves. Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea or any hints or tips to solve this problem and to guide them to open their inner dialogue?
Mm-hmm. I think it's another way that the art can help, but it's not perfect, because people who want to keep secrets will draw rainbows and hearts and flowers, and it's all beautiful and wonderful, but even that we can work with. So let's say that it's all beautiful rainbows, hearts, and flowers, and it's all lovely. We can help them notice some small discrepancies. Something that's a little bit different here or there in the painting, and have them elaborate on that small discrepancy. Anything that we notice that's a little different. But I do think the art, and sometimes the art assessments that we can perform, give us a clue, and the person who's in art therapy with us some information about what's going on with them. Many times they don't intentionally keep secrets, but they unintentionally keep secrets from themselves, and they can reveal them in art sometimes in ways that they don't know. So when we ask them to create something, and they're a person that hasn't used art materials in a long time, here's an opening. They might not know how to defend themselves that way, whereas they could defend themselves verbally. If they want to keep secrets, they know what to say and what not to say. Many times artistically they don't know, and so the dialogue is open through art, except if they're a bit sophisticated, and then everything's hearts and rainbows and flowers and that sort of thing. But from the stereotypical image, we find any small deviation, and we build on that deviation. A different color, something that's a different size, something that's a different shape, something that has a little bit of individual meaning, and we ask them maybe to create an image just of that one thing. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Dr. Lisa. I want to ask if you have tried to adopt the expressive art therapy into the group context, and is there any difference between using the therapy in individual counseling and also in group context? And then if someone really got no comments about their artwork, what can the facilitator or the counselor do? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Sure. If somebody didn't have any comments about their artwork, I would accept that, and sometimes I might have them do a response piece. So again, facilitating this inner dialogue. So this piece says something. How would you respond to that in another way? And maybe in that same way, I would have them maybe not, if they were using pencils, use markers, or if they were having markers, use paint, or maybe change the media that they were using, but have them have a dialogue just in art. And they don't have to add words. I really trust that just the creation of that image is enough, and they got something, they got what they needed just from that. So words are not necessary. And art therapy is wonderful in groups. There are ways to invite people in, especially if we know the Expressive Therapies Continuum, and we teach our clients the same language in a group setting. You can have everybody doing a similar similar project, but they can adapt it themselves by changing the media, changing the direction slightly, changing it in a way that fits themselves because they know on some level what they need. And so they can, in a group, have it be individualized. So it's very, art therapy works very, very nicely in groups. Also in a group where we have images, we're likely to see the commonalities more quickly rather than when people say in words what they think their difficulties are. If they've created images, then we have commonalities in form, in color, in symbol, in that sort of thing. And so that's how we as the therapists can help them see the similarities that they have, because we all want to know that we're not alone. Yeah. So it's very, very powerful in groups.
Hi, Dr. Lisa. I would like to know, is there any topics when you're having an outburst with the clients, or just give them the theme when you have a counseling? Yeah.
Actually, both ways. I prefer at first to have no theme and just allow them to experiment with the materials, to get to know them, to express whatever's in their heart and mind. That's really what I would prefer in the beginning. And then I would work with the patient or the client to then have this dialogue where they choose where it is they go. What is it that they need to express? How is it that they need to respond? So sometimes I will suggest maybe develop that dream or follow the line of anxiety or something. But I think patients often know, and from those first free paintings, drawings, images, they will show you where they need to go. The first images in art therapy are like the first dreams in psychoanalysis. They often tell you everything in a small capsule. Mm-hmm. Other comments or questions? Yes. Art therapy does help eating disorder patients. That was another book that I wrote, Drawing from Within, Using Art to Treat Eating Disorders. My original specialty in clinical psychology was treating eating disorders. So many ways. Sometimes people with eating disorders have learned not to have emotions. And so not eating or overeating, binging and purging are ways to manage emotions. So we introduce people to the expressive language as an alternative to using eating and food. And boy, I could go on and on and on about that question. But yes, it does have many, many implications for people with eating disorders. For body image, to explore body image is very necessary. There's been research that shows if a person's body image does not change, then the eating disorder comes back over and over and over. Art therapy is extremely useful in helping to examine body image in small, in large form, large life-size drawings, even small drawings of the self-reflective drawings, self-portraits. Very important in body image work. Mm-hmm. Exploring family dynamics, all sorts of ways. Yes. Yeah. What's the name of that book? The book is called Drawing from Within. It was published by Jessica Kingsley Publishers in 2006.
Can you tell us your experiences in using art therapy to those highly suicidal patients?
Yes. Again, as I've said before, patients know what they need, and many times when somebody is desperately suicidal, the art will also show the ambivalence. So most of the time when somebody is suicidal, they're not 100% committed to suicide, or they wouldn't be there. So they are somewhat ambivalent. The art is wonderful in illuminating the ambivalence and allowing us to focus on the hope. So you can only imagine, even in the darkest, so people that are very depressed tend to either use dark colors, small figures, or a lack of color. But even in those darkest paintings, even in those most depressing themes, we can see the ambivalence. And so it's undeniable when it's right there in black and white. So art therapy is really wonderful in helping people that are suicidal understand that they are ambivalent and that there is some hope. And if we can't see it in the original painting or picture, then we will see it in the next one or the next one. We will see it. There's someone here.
So what would you do if one of the participants doesn't want to do any artwork in the group?
That happens, and I think we have to respect that for that time. Sometimes I would say just pick something that looks interesting and experiment with it. Don't make anything. Don't make anything that's anything. Just experiment. Just take the materials and see what they do. Most of the time, people who don't want to do something have a very strong internal critic. And so they're saying it has to look good, it has to be perfect. And so there's that part of them that's very critical. And so if you give them an instruction that they're just experimenting, they're not creating anything, they're not making an image, they're just seeing what the materials do, then it's about the materials and not about the product that they're, and they can work their way into creating a product. But it's not important. The product is not important. The process at that point will be very important for them, not the product. If that makes sense. What type of person is suitable to be an art therapist? You know, I was a clinical psychologist first, and in my first job, I worked at a counseling center at the University of Louisville, where they had an expressive therapies program. And the director came in one day and said, "Nobody wants to supervise an expressive therapy intern, do they?" "No, I didn't think so." "Wait, what? And those people are all crazy. So maybe you have to be a little crazy." No, that's what he said. They're all crazy and you don't want to, but when I witnessed the power of art, I knew I had to be an art therapist. So I was able to stand behind a one-way mirror and hear and see what was going on with this art therapist who I said, yes, I do want to supervise the art therapy intern. And I was able to see what happened in the session. Over the course of a year, I was convinced I had to be an art therapist. So anybody is suitable to be an art therapist as long as they can see the power of this medium. And I think the Expressive Therapies Continuum shows very well how this is powerful. Some people say, oh, art therapy, that's good for expressing emotion. Yes, and it's good for helping people develop their cognitive skills and think through problems and make decisions. And it's good for helping people find meaning and creating symbols and embracing their spirituality. And it's good for, on and on and on and on. And when you see it and can appreciate it, if you can appreciate the power, then you can be an art therapist. And you don't even have to be artistic. That's what we tell our patients. Any other comments or questions?
So considering about the time, maybe we will have the final 3 questions, one over there, one here, and then the final one, just in case you have one. Thank you.
I'm thinking
Please.
about the culture thing in Hong Kong because people come to seek counseling. They want to talk and talk. And I don't know how to engage them to change to art therapy. Can you tell us how to initiate this and change the process and so that we can experience the power?
That was also a problem for me at first because being trained as a verbal psychologist was very difficult to trust this strange process. I agree. And I think that when we have the materials available, when we make it important ourselves, many times it's not the patients, but it's us that are a little shy, that aren't so sure that, but if we are very confident, then we offer and we continue to offer, and we don't value the words more than the process or the product that is created. So I think most of the time, at least for me, the difficulty was with me because I was a little shy about what I was doing. And I was trained in cognitive behavioral therapy. That was the most important way to treat people. And, people do want to talk and they want to explain. But when we see how the art can deepen their understanding, then we have to keep offering. We have to keep offering. We have to keep making it important. It doesn't have to be, as we were saying earlier, it doesn't have to take up all 50 minutes of the 50-minute session, but it has to be important. There was one more. Yes, please.
Yeah. Hi, Lisa. Thank you very much for a very enriching seminar. I really learned a lot today.
Thank you.
Want to ask, is it available in Hong Kong, this art therapy thing? I mean, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that. Just wanting to know if you want to access something like art therapy, is it available in Hong Kong?
Yes, there's a Hong Kong Art Therapy Association. There are art therapists here in Hong Kong at the Center for Behavioral I'm saying the title where I work. At the Behavioral Health Center here, there are art therapists. Yes.
And then, so is it sort of, can you just sign up for a private session sort of thing? I mean, you don't have to be sort of sick in any way. I mean, some people just want to explore themselves
exactly.
like that workaholic lawyer.
Like the workaholic lawyer.
She just wanted to explore herself. And sometimes I think in life it's quite useful to step back and, and have some sort of like a refresher of, sort of rethink what you want to do. And it's quite useful. You don't have to be sort of sick in any way to join a course like that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so now you see what you have a need for this. And I agree with you 100%. I think if we have a self-reflective process, then we're less likely to get caught up in things that we don't value in our busy life. And you don't have to be so disordered to decide you want to explore and enrich your life. Yes. And so sometimes calling it life enrichment is a way to get people to come. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
One final question. One final question. Yay. Mm-hmm. And when you say people with mental disabilities, do you mean mental retardation or schizophrenia? Yes, mental retardation. Sometimes the goals are different. So rather than being more depth, they're more breadth. And so rather than going deeper, you go wider. So how can art help them broaden the number of things or the things that they're engaged in the world? How can art help them by engaging, increase their sense of self-esteem, self-efficacy? So they might not be able to deeply tell you about themselves, but they enrich their lives by being more having more skills, being more proud of the work they do, and that sort of thing, if that makes sense. So the goals would probably be different depending on the level of disability. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for making me feel so welcome. And I appreciate all your questions and the fact that you're here on a Sunday afternoon when you didn't have to be, but you chose to be. So I know you want to enrich your lives. So thank you so, so much. And I believe the green form is an evaluation form that's important for the Center on Behavioral Health to have.
Thank you,
So
Lisa.
thank you very much. You're welcome,
So
Venus.
I invite all of us to just have a big hands for very fruitful and enriching sharing. So I think it's very important. Not only having a workshop is good, but today, if you don't have a chance or time to have get yourself into a workshop, just go home, buy some crayons or drawing paper, enrich your life by drawing. Start creating something, expressing yourself in different ways. So, and I noticed quite a number of friends here, they're having some sort of clinical intervention question. So in case you're interested, you may want to look into Lisa's book called Expressive Therapies Continuum, a framework for using art in therapy. So apologize that we don't have the copies in the center, but you may want to look into the book in Amazon or in DMOX or whatever bookshops in Hong Kong. And also do remember to bring this handout that Lisa has kindly to all of us to bring it home and then to look into the themes and do some revision again. Hopefully it can help you to understand the topic. And of course, we strongly recommend and I would like to invite you to fill in this form because this is very important for us to know how we are doing. And finally, we would like to have a brief promotion about the next upcoming program. This will be conducted by a local clinical psychologist, Dr. Edward Shen. The event is Energy Diagnostic and Treatment Methods. This is another energy therapy technique, incorporating some sort of Chinese medicine concept regarding related to the meridians and doing some kind of diagnostic and treatment. Very handy, user-friendly. So in case you're interested in this area, please look into the information that we are posting up in Facebook, also the leaflet and the application form here. And if you have any question, please come to us, and then we'll happy to answer. Okay, so thank you again for coming and looking forward to see you all in our next event. Thank you.